Welcome to another episode of Growth Hacker TV. I'm Bronson Taylor, and today I have Kyle Wild with us. Kyle, thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me.
And I have to say, your last name might be the best last name ever. Right?
Get that.
Kyle Wild. So you are the CEO and founder of Keen.io. Tell us about that. What is Keen.io?
So Keen.io is a developer platform that lets software engineers do really complicated data science work really easily.
Perfect. Now, I saw online that you said that you're trying to do for analytics what Amazon Web Services did for the data center. What do you mean by that?
Well, the field of, by analogy, so the field of analytics and data science has this really complicated skill set that's really difficult. And right now, it's actually the hardest thing to hire in technology is a data infrastructure engineer and a data scientist. Mm-hmm. So we thought back to the days before Amazon Web Services, like when I built my first kind of web business when I was a kid in like 1998, 99.
I had the dark ages.
Dark ages, right? I had to think about servers, everything from servers and how big is my internet connection and what's the co-location center like, all the way to like my code and what's the website design like and what's the content like and everything in between. Mm-hmm. And there's the data center engineer and the system administrator. That kind of whole skill set used to be part of the cost of doing business when it came to building an online company. Mm-hmm. Now a lot of that's gone away, and at least the upfront cost and the talent cost has gone away, and Amazon Web Services puts that behind an API so that you can just, any developer can spin up 500 servers if they want, if they're willing to pay as they go. Mm-hmm. And we looked at it like that would be the right solution for how to solve the data talent crisis. So data talent crisis is really, really big. It's really real. I mean, you should look at any of the people on my team's LinkedIn inbox is just full of recruiters trying to get data people. Yeah. I think there's a better solution than throwing more people at the problem, and the solution is giving developers tools to build whatever they want in the data like big data space, I guess. Yeah.
Why is that a better solution? Talk us through kind of the pros of that API approach instead of just throwing more data scientists at it.
One of them's really cost. Even if there were enough data scientists on the talent market, it's not cheap to have these people on staff all the time. And a piece of that cost is that it's front-loaded cost. So, it's front-loaded value, but it's ongoing overhead. Yeah. So most of the value you get out of a data science team happens, in the first few months that they're working for your company. To build up the infrastructure, the practices, and get the stakeholders all the data stuff they need, and then it's kind of on autopilot. We think that the solution of throwing a bunch of data scientists at the problem is way too expensive, and that's if the people run the talent market, but really they're just not. Yeah. We think developers have most of the tools they need to be data people. Software is just this thing where you write code to move data around. That's what software already is, data oriented. And software engineers they're usually pretty quantitative. They know how to use APIs. They already have the skill sets to be data people. The tools are just difficult, and it takes a long time to figure out how to use some of the tools available. Yeah. And we're here to try to simplify that whole world down to things that we think everyone can understand.
Yeah. So just so we have even a clearer view of what it is you're kind of replacing, what would a typical data scientist do in a startup? If you were to hire one or a team of them, what kinds of numbers are they crunching? What kinds of reports are they giving? What kinds of things do they do day to day?
Some of the big things are really not that complicated. Things like A/B tests. An A/B test where you say, I've got content that looks like this and content looks like that. I want to pit them against each other and see what performs better. So like my landing page might have 10 versions that have different copy, and I want to see which one converts better. That kind of stuff is pretty simple. It's like a two-step conversion analysis. And then you've got more complicated stuff like somebody came from a certain ad that we posted on Google, and then they landed on the site, and then they made an account, and then 2 months later, did they pay or did they not? That kind of analysis, like a long funnel analysis. Those are kind of two of the most common cases. And really, it's kind of a matter of what they do all day. So to answer the first part of your question, what they do is they learn how to manage like a 10 server Hadoop cluster, and how to put layers on top of Hadoop and write distributed functional code and really pretty esoteric stuff. Yeah. Just to do like a funnel analysis, correlation analysis, stuff that's not that hard, to understand conceptually. It can be very hard to actually implement
Yeah.
That's what we're here to fix.
So you kind of provide the tools that, give developers the ability to become data scientists because they already have so many of the tools they need and so many of the characteristics and personality traits. You just give them the last little bit they need to really go deep into data. Would that be accurate?
Yep.
All right,
Yeah.
perfect.
Like people want to make a funnel. Like we have an API for funnels. Like we have a JavaScript library for people to make funnels. Like instead of all of those things I just described that people have to know as data gets big, they just don't care. If the data is big, they just pay more, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, makes sense. So what was the initial reason for building this type of platform? Was it just a personal need? You were a developer that needed an API to do this? Was it just you saw a pain in the marketplace and you took advantage of it? What was kind of the impetus for beginning Keen.io?
So one of my favorite quotes is in the Stanford commencement speech when Steve Jobs says, like, you can't connect the dots from where you're standing, but if you look backward, you can connect the dots, right?
Yeah.
It'll make it seem like this was on purpose when I connect the dots for you going back.
That's right. That's life right there.
Yeah, it makes it seem, it's like, oh wow, actually, if I'd planned this, it would have made a lot of sense. But so I mean, my first job out of college was I was a developer support, engineering support for Google Analytics, and what I did was I helped developers who wanted to get more power out of Google Analytics, which wasn't really a developer tool. It's really more of a tool for people buying ads. But people who, like, I talk to those people all day long and help them with their stuff. And the use cases that people have for analytics stuff are just widely divergent. They're all over the place where people can value. Then I went on and I did a few startups, and at every startup I was building kind of internal. I mean, I'm a data geek, so I was always, besides being a software engineer, I was always trying to figure out what's going on, what are people doing, what's working, what's not, like how can we segment the user base, all that kind of stuff. And I did that across a few startups, and by the third time I was like, okay, I'm pretty decent at this now. Why do I have to keep building this stuff from scratch? Like, what tool would have worked, out of the box? Yeah. And my co-founders are both from the Force.com platform team. So this is the Salesforce developer ecosystem. And between the two of them, they spent 10 or 11 years there. So I talked to them about it, and I was like, I think the key problem is that everybody out there that builds analytics stuff is trying to build for a use case. They're trying to build a specific product for a specific use case. Which is fine, but then inevitably there are all these users who want to use it for other things and want to have their own use cases. So we're like, what if we just took down the sort of level of abstraction just a little bit and said, build your own? Like, what if you could just build your own Google Analytics in 10 or 15 API calls? Gotcha. So it takes a little bit more work to get going, but now if you want an additional kind of feature, you can build it because you own it. Yeah. Well, that kind of leads into my next question is, how does Keen.io differentiate itself from like a Kissmetrics or a Mixpanel? And I think you just answered it, but I want to hear you kind of do it in the context of those companies, Yeah, I mean, the key distinction is that they're built for a use case. So, So what is that use case? Tell us what they're built for, and then show us the robustness of Keen.io. so the use case, for Mixpanel is like you send them data. You write code in your app, you send them event data, so events that are happening inside your app. And then you go type in mixpanel.com and you log in and you click around and build charts and stuff. And on top of that, they have a really great use case that's for marketing automation. So now you can set up triggers that'll automatically, send alerts to users or to your sales team about different things that are happening with users. And it's a very good product. It's a product. What we do is, if you log into our site, you don't see any of those fancy tools. You see developer credentials, API documentation. But the difference is that with some effort, you can build tools like Mixpanel or Kissmetrics on our platform, internally owned. So basically, if those tools are really good for one or two use cases, we're kind of this tool that's built for all the other ones. Or even just more tailored versions of those use cases. So a good, for instance, is one of the key So I keep saying it's all these many use cases, but we do segment the world a little bit and try to think about how are these things falling into buckets. One of the things we talk about is okay, let's say that you just wanted to have the exact same functionality, but you wanted it to be on your own website. So you're a SaaS business, and your customers log into your website and their businesses themselves, and they want to go to their admin panel and see analytics. You can't exactly just say, oh, here's the account credentials for our master account for Kissmetrics. You can't do that. So a lot of our customers are kind of this, we call it the two-level analytics problem. They want to do data science and analytics on across all their customers, but they also want to provide a subset of that reporting to each customer.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that we're tailor built for. And we have security features to allow people to do that in a way that segments one customer's data from another's, but also they can zoom out and look at the whole thing. That's one of those things where we didn't really anticipate that use case, but it started to emerge, and now we've built features to support it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know where else I would go to actually do that, you know what I mean? I can go and get data from my personal web app, but I can't then give that to my clients at a third, fourth layer down. So I don't know what the other solution would be except for what you did, which is doing it in-house over and over and then realizing there's got to be a better way. So it makes sense why people are using it that way.
It's in-house. It's over and over,
Yeah.
And look at things like Flurry. Flurry has 8 or 9 really nice charts for mobile app makers to study user behavior.
Mm-hmm.
What if you want the 10th chart? You want an 11th chart, or you want each of those charts to have a drop down where you can sort by gender. It doesn't have that, so you're just stuck. It's well, too bad our tool doesn't do it, so we can't actually do any kind of ask any data questions about gender or age or whatever the random thing is that puts people over the top, and then they come to us.
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually studying Flurry this week to try to get my head around Keen.io, and seeing what they do, it actually helped me understand what you guys do because I saw the differences. I could see what it means. It almost reminds me of the difference in Twitter and app.net, where it's you have one that's the product, and you have the other that's the raw developer tools to rebuild a Twitter if you want, or rebuild anything else if you want. Is that a fair comparison, you think?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that's a very solid comparison. Another one that we've kicked around is you've got Tumblr,
mm-hmm.
which is good to go make a blog, and then you've got WordPress, where you can make all kinds of stuff. You can add whatever you kind of want to it. It's a little bit harder to get started. It's built for developers.
Yeah.
You can do a whole lot more with WordPress than you can with Tumblr. And one of the things you could do with WordPress is build Tumblr if you wanted to.
Yeah, no, that's great. So that kind of leads to my next question, which is what kinds of companies should really consider using Keen.io? Because like you said, it's a little bit harder to get started. So this is going to scare away some kinds of companies, but it's going to make other companies get very excited. Who is your customer here, ideally? What kinds of verticals or what kinds of DNA do they have?
So the verticals are really all over the map, but we segment in other ways. So we're focused on companies that have between, call it 3 and 20 developers.
Okay.
Not just 1 or 2 people. They probably have a little bit of funding. Although we're happy to support people that are in accelerators and hackathons. We have a free tier for that.
Mm-hmm.
But our sweet spot really, they have a handful of people, up to maybe 20 developers. Probably more like 3 to 10, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
And they, the company size can skew all over the place. We're working with a large, online publisher who has 6 developers, but they're a very large company because they're not a software company.
Yeah.
And then we've got software companies when they have 6 developers. They're obviously much earlier stage, and in their DNA they've got they want to get more out of data.
Mm-hmm.
They're kind of chronically unhappy. When we see people complain or hear people complaining about the analytics tools they've used before, it's easy to throw stones at them, but those tools are great at what they do. The reality is that this customer is just more demanding.
Yeah.
So we skew toward definitely more demanding, and people that are kind of unhappy or wish there were more they could do with whatever analytics tool they might be using, all the way up to people who have already realized this is a problem, that building in-house is the only alternative, and they've started trying to build in-house. Sometimes they've spun up a database like MongoDB or Postgres to try to build an analytics, basically try to build the kind of stuff we build.
Mm-hmm.
And they ran into problems, either that developer left and isn't there to support it anymore, or ran into scale issues, which is pretty common. This stuff's not easy to build at scale.
Mm-hmm.
Or they just realized at the very beginning that there must be some way to do this and get value next week instead of having to wait for a 6-month build out of a big data backend. And those companies, we skew toward. We focus very much on the kind of technical component of a company. A lot of times it's developer teams. Sometimes there are people who have data engineers, and the data engineers just don't want to build the event data thing to handle all this event data and historical stuff.
Yeah.
They'd rather do data science and ask good questions that can drive the business.
Yeah.
And they want to get more leverage the same way. I used to build servers as a kid,
Mm-hmm.
but I sure don't do that now.
Yeah.
I just want to use AWS, I use SoftLayer, I use Rackspace. I don't want to manually put hard drives into computers, even though I know how. So some of them actually know very well what we're doing, and they ask us very good questions about our actual data stack, and they ask us about how we're handling queuing and what's our scalable database back. They ask us the kind of questions. I'm like, oh, you could do this, and you just don't want to, and that's kind of the thing.
Yeah, you allow people to focus on the higher order things, the more important things for their particular business, because they're not an analytics business. They just need the analytics to drive their business. So it makes sense that you provide that for them. I was looking at your website. It seems like that you guys are more than willing to actually provide the service of actually setting up Keen.io for some of your customers and actually building out these dashboards and these panels. Tell us about that a little bit. What does that process typically look like when they bring you in to actually implement beyond just providing the API for their developers?
So, I mean, we do a few things in the kind of like professional services side. I'll talk a little bit about why, and then I'll dig in.
Yeah.
So, the reason here is that, you look at a product like Google Analytics or Flurry. One of the things that should stand out as if you're evaluating those products is that they're free, and that tells you something.
Mm-hmm.
Either it's an unsustainable business, or they're making their money in some other way.
Mm-hmm.
So Google Analytics is really generally a component that helps AdWords sell better.
Yeah.
And Flurry is an intelligence company, so they want you to instrument your app so that they can study the data themselves and build research and do ad optimization stuff for their customers. So, the incentives aren't aligned unless you're paying.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at the same time, we're in a position where our incentives are very much aligned because we get more. We basically, if our customers grow, they pay us more.
Yeah.
So we're in the business of actually making our customers better at what they do.
Yeah.
To the extent that we can, so we'll give away like a day at a certain tier. We give away 1 day of like data science consulting, or we'll give away a half day at a smaller tier.
Mm-hmm.
We're only really doing that because we want them to have a better integration and get more value out of their data.
Yeah.
And there are some customers who think that it's going to take longer, and sometimes it does. And a lot of times we have to focus more on data strategy and education. So educating giving them the vocabulary as a team to talk about this stuff, and helping them with strategy, like really digging into their business. And say it's really kind of some of the most fun work we do is like sitting down with people and talking about where's the data coming from now, what do we have, and what can we do, where's the 80-20 kind of trade-off on what kind of integration we can do to start getting business value immediately. Mm-hmm. What should we do first? Or should we be focusing on like marketing data or on usage data, or what, that kind of thing on the strategy level. So there's data strategy and education. Mm-hmm. And then what you asked directly about was kind of implementation consulting. So we're very cautious about this. Like, we don't want to become a dev shop. We want to partner with those kinds of companies, but we want to focus on our platform.
Yeah.
That being said, like, some of the best learnings we get come from when we're using our tool, using our product ourselves. Mm-hmm. So what we'll do in the integration side is we'll pair program with people, which means we will deploy somebody to sit next to their developer and like work through the problems together. Mm-hmm. That way we know it's still partially about education and coaching them along, and they're getting value because they feel comfortable. They know the best practices are definitely being followed if the person in the room.
Yeah.
And on our end, we know that we're not an outsourced developer shop that they're using to just do that. We have partnerships with development firms and consulting companies that will do that kind of work.
Yeah.
We focus really on teaching people to fish. We don't want to get in the business of fishing.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes a lot of sense. You talked about how you're cautious because you don't want to become a dev shop. And so the reality is that most people in the world will never be able to sit down with your team. So here's what I want to do for a minute. I want to do like a little mock consulting, okay? Now, obviously, I know that every situation is 100% different, that, the things that are different are more, severe than the things that are the same. But putting that aside for a second, I want to ask some questions as if I'm coming into your data scientist and you're trying to help me figure out my business, all right?
Sure.
So what...
I have to give a little bit of a disclaimer.
Please.
I'm not on the team at this, but I'll give it a shot.
No, that's fine. That's fine. My questions are high level because I can't get into the actual specifics because they're so different. So let's do a little mock consulting. What data should a startup generally be recording? What kinds of data happens on a site or happens in their ecosystem that really needs to be captured?
It's a very general question.
Yeah.
I'm a data nut, so...
Well, give us general answers then. Tell us some of the possibilities.
But like a website, the very minimum is you need to capture every page view. Mm-hmm. And to the extent that you can, each page view should be captured alongside all of the user information that you have. So if somebody lands on my site from a Google ad, or let's say somebody lands on my site from a link, from Growth Hacker TV, right? Mm-hmm. That information about where they came from needs to follow them forever.
Okay.
So that's kind of what we call, capturing the state, capturing everything about the user, even if they don't have an account yet.
Mm-hmm.
We do know something about them. We know what page they landed on. Might have been some blog post that we wrote about, iPhone data collection or something.
Mm-hmm.
We know where they came from. It might have been somebody that cross-posted that blog post.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to know that stuff forever so we can attribute their future behavior. Let's say you've got page views,
Mm-hmm.
but you've also got signups.
Mm-hmm.
You've got purchases. I need to be able to attribute those purchases all the way back to where they came from and what landing page they hit, and maybe so we can point to like, wow, this blog post doesn't get as much traffic as the others, but 4% of people who land through this blog post end up paying within a month. Like, that's pretty awesome. Let's drive traffic to that. And that's just with 3 kinds of events. Landing on a page, looking at any page views, and paying.
Mm-hmm.
You can do a lot with just those.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is, the more general answer is what qualifies as an event is kind of a big question.
Mm-hmm.
For us, what we like to tell people is anything that your team on the business side and the developer side agree makes sense. Like anything that if you both speak the same language on something, like everybody understands page view,
Mm-hmm.
that's probably an event that you should be recording. Click, if the business people don't know how they're going to analyze click,
Mm-hmm.
even though it's easy for click to be, it's very easy to record that as a developer. It's probably not the right level of granularity to be recording.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's case by case. A lot of times, we get deployed and we just have to think on the fly, and we have kind of heuristics for how to think about this, but there's no one-size-fits-all answer, which is part of why we exist.
No, I like what you just said, because you actually gave a great insight, which is it's where the suits and the devs agree, right? When they agree on what an event is, you probably have hit upon something, because the developers know, logically why that matters in their system, and the business people know how they're going to use it to inform their future decisions. So when that Venn diagram, when those two things overlap, you have something very valuable that's happening on the website, and that could be different for every startup. But now at least there's a way to kind of get to that. So I like what you said there. Are there any kind of things that they should be doing with that data that every startup should be doing? You hear a lot about cohort analysis and things like that now. Should all startups be running those kinds of analysis on the data, or is there any other things you think they should be doing with this data that maybe doesn't get as much buzz or hype? I mean, what do you think about that?
I have a lot of thoughts on that. I try not to make any decrees like all startups should be doing the following. Like, there's a lot of stuff that almost all startups should be doing that we're not even doing yet. And we're a data science company. And on our own site, we're not doing everything that we want to be doing. And some of it's because of sample size. Basically, there are a few kinds of analysis that I think are definitely underappreciated. And number one is funnels. Conversion funnels are awesome, and we have cases of people using conversion funnels for crazy divergent things. Conversion funnel just means somebody did step 1. How many of those people did? What percentage of those people did step 2, and what percentage of those people did step 3?
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, we have a partnership with SendGrid, which is an email API.
Yeah.
And SendGrid generates all these events that you can dump into our system with a little one-click integration. And those events are delivered an email got opened, email got clicked. People should be making funnels that start there and continue on until landed on the website,
Mm-hmm.
made an account, or logged into the website, all the way through to paying, so that you can actually attribute an email campaign to what happened in your business. Not enough people doing that. And the reason for that is that it was actually impossible before. I mean, you could either build it in-house, but there isn't a tool that can do that besides ours, because we have a very generic kind of concept of a funnel.
Yeah.
And people use that stuff for things like a server boots up, and then a server hits a memory limit within 3 hours. That's totally crazy. It's not necessarily even people-oriented. I think that kind of analysis is really powerful, and I think being able to filter on the cohort is really, really crucial.
Mm-hmm.
So, being able to say that same thing, and then about the email campaign, email got sent, opened, clicked, landed on site, paid money, if that's a 5-step kind of funnel. Being able to make that funnel and then segment it on, okay, which email campaign, or which what was the sign-up bucket for this user? Are these users who came through a big PR push in November, or these people who came through ad buys in January? That kind of segmentation gives you a lot more insight than just kind of a broad view of, how's the funnel look. That's the difference between vanity and data vanity and data science is pretty crucial. I
Yeah.
think a lot of people want to just feel. A lot of people out there in tech aren't data oriented. They don't have the DNA, but they, maybe they have investors or they read blogs that guilt them into thinking they need to we need to do analytics. So there's like a box that they're trying to check.
Yeah.
There's too much of that thinking. And there's not sort of, I'm trying to get knowledge. I'm trying to actually like scientifically figure things out so I can drive my business with that stuff, with that insight.
Yeah.
And if you're not doing cohort or deep segmentation analysis, you're probably just sort of, it's vanity. You're just satisfying vanity.
No, absolutely. We actually just had Alistair Kroll on the show, one of the authors of Lean Analytics. And we talked about that a lot. He went through the vanity analytics and, why they don't matter. And so, at this point, refer back to that interview because you need to watch that again as well because it was exactly what you're saying. You guys are in 100% agreement.
I've never met him, but I've seen a couple of his talks.
Yeah, I think that book's really going to help kind of the industry, honestly. I think it's going to set kind of a new level of understanding for analytics and what matters, which I think will help Keen.io because the more, there's an understanding of what you guys do and why it's not vain and how you actually support companies, it's better it's going to be for you guys as well. Let me ask you another question. You get to see a lot of these different companies. You see the ones who are involved with vain analytics. You see the ones who are just doing awesome, recording the right things, understand the data, making good business decisions based off of it. What do the companies that succeed at analytics have in common? What threads do you see that runs through them, if there is any? I don't know.
So that's a good question. Something I have to think about a little bit. One of the things we like to talk about is kind of, there's like a continuum. People talk about data-driven, right? So my hand, right? Okay, so data-driven over here. Like as if that's sort of the holy grail. And then data-blind is over here. We actually look for something right in the middle, which is we call data-informed, which is, not purely intuitive like an Apple, but not totally mechanical like a Google. A lot of times, we think that the right way to run a business is really informed by data.
Okay.
But not necessarily paralyzed by it.
Yeah.
There are companies where, there's conflict on a decision and nobody has authority to make a decision, so it's okay, well, let's just run an experiment. It takes like a month to collect the data. And then meanwhile, your competitors have already implemented one, and failed, implemented the other, and now they've made the decision in 2 weeks, So I think obviously now we're talking about Apple and Google. These are two of the most successful tech companies ever. So it tells you that there's probably not a right answer. You could probably succeed, because of or despite where you are in the spectrum. But I think that, if data's going to really contribute, you should sit somewhere in the middle. There should be a sort of data-informed approach.
No, I think that's a very powerful answer because you're an analytics company pulling away from the purely data-driven side of that continuum. So I think that has power when you say it, particularly, that there's something to that for sure. And you were at Google, so you understand what the other side looks like as well. So I think it's a great answer. Yeah,
we're making products for people. That's what we all do. And there's no algorithm for poetry, right? That's something I always say. It's like sometimes it feels like there's companies out there. They're like Vulcans from Star Trek, trying to reason their way to like creating like a beautiful song. It doesn't always work. Now, what you can do is you can throw 5 songs at the wall and then test them. You could certainly, the music industry in LA has definitely demonstrated that you can use data, to help select to the extent that you have time. But we're definitely. I might be the worst data scientist ever saying that like you shouldn't be that strict about your analytics focus. And I think the lean startup movement has done a lot to create awareness, but it's also done a lot to make people feel like there's a right way, like there's a syllabus for actually making a great product. And if there were, there'd be a lot more great products.
And that's right. There's a lot of people that follow lean methodology that fail miserably because there's poetry in it. Like you said, you can't just make that. So I think you're absolutely right. Let's talk about Keen.io a little bit and the growth of Keen.io itself. What have been your all's primary channels for customer acquisition? What have been the channels that you really get your customers through?
So we run a very lean shop. We have a brand that's way bigger than our sort of age and funding would indicate. So we do it through guerrilla. Like we're just totally online guerrillas. Like we're hustling on chat rooms. We're answering people's questions. We're making sure that the people, Maven first marketing, kind of like the tipping point stuff, we take that to heart. Making sure that the people who really know what they're doing know about us. It's been pretty key. Our biggest channels are blog by far. And our blog again, like going back to the data versus intuition, like we take a very long approach on marketing. You've got on marketing, there's another continuum that's like quantitative marketing, which is all about ad buy and like outbound and SEM and all this stuff, click-through rates. And then you've got branding on the other side, which is like, that stuff's been around way longer than data science, right? Which is much more sort of, how will this make people feel in general about us? And like, it changes, there's math somewhere. It changes like the likelihood that a random person will, like the net promoter score and stuff, but you can't run a split test on your net promoter score. You can't say, let's go out there and be mean and let's go out there and be nice and see which one works. Like you actually have to just make a gut call on that. We take a very long approach on that, and it's definitely paying dividends now. But it's we've been a company for 14 months, and it's slow going. It takes a lot of faith to do that. Like we're not writing blog posts. All of our if you go to our blog, a lot of our blog posts are about startup culture, about work culture, about social issues and tech that we're passionate about, and then probably 15% of our blog posts have something to do with data science and analytics. But really, it's those other ones that drive a lot of traffic. So a lot of it's like having a position. One of the things we think is really, like, a lot of people talk about content marketing and blog-based inbound marketing being really powerful, but then they turn around and they delegate it. They're like, okay, now let's hire a full-time blogger so the team can focus on the real stuff. We don't have a full-time blogger. But everyone on the team has written a blog post with at least 5,000. I'm pretty sure at least 10,000 uniques. Wow. So, giving people a voice, creating an authentic voice as a brand, and then giving each individual an authentic voice of their own, or letting their voice come really, has worked really well for us. So you'll like my blog posts they always tend to be a little bit professorial, a little short. Dan and my co-founder. Our CTO's blog posts tend to be way more narrative. He's a great storyteller. Our biggest blogger, Michelle, who's one of our engineers, talks about really personal narratives and extrapolating kind of like meaning and heuristics and stuff. So like if you go Google right now for startup negotiation, I'm pretty sure we're still #1 on just a blog post about that.
Wow.
Which is not exactly speaking directly to the technology. Like our target is the technologist in a startup, or the technologist in any company with between 3 and 20 developers.
Yeah.
We're not speaking directly to them all the time, but in the long term, people, like so many of our customers, so many times we've had a conversation with them, like, oh, actually, yeah, we found you first, with your demo day post back in June, and then, then we saw this other thing on Hacker News, and then like found a tweet that went viral, and now we made an account, and it's. Some of this stuff is hard to measure. It's hard to attribute. Actually, some of it's impossible to attribute well, but we see it working. So, I think that there's tons of leverage in that. That's something that the big companies can't do. They can't build a product and company brand that are super laser focused. Like Google Reader can't have a brand. If it does, its brand is kind of dead now. Yeah. And it's hard to build a lot of trust in the product that's is just a sub-product of some bigger thing. So like as a startup, we have to use our advantages. Yeah. Every weakness is a strength, and one of the weaknesses is we don't have a huge marketing budget and don't have a huge PR arm. It's also a strength because it's like, okay, what are we going to do under these conditions of constraint?
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned the word guerrilla. You guys are just scrappy, Besides the blog, because obviously that's a huge inbound piece of marketing for you guys, what's been like the single best guerrilla tactic that you've tried that just worked, maybe surprisingly worked, or that had some blip on the radar for you guys?
Sorry, you're breaking up a little bit there.
Oh, sorry. I said, you mentioned that you guys can hear me okay now?
Could you ask that again? Sorry.
Yeah, I'll ask you again.
You broke up. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. You're jumping around a little bit. I think my internet. Give me 1 second just to kind of make sure it's.
If you want, you can hang up and call me back, and then it usually fixes it.
I just need to check one thing to see how my. Okay, actually, looks pretty good. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Cool. I just needed to run a little diagnostic here on the Wi-Fi. It looks fine.
Okay.
Had a hiccup. Do you mind asking that?
Yeah, if you're streaming Netflix, maybe you could just pause it for a minute. No, I'm kidding.
I got to do it with the Spotify in like perfect detail, right?
Yeah, exactly, right? No, I'll ask you again. We'll start with that question. So you mentioned the word guerrilla, that you guys are scrappy. What's been, besides the blog, one of the guerrilla tactics that's really worked for you guys, where you tried something a little bit subversive, a little bit unusual, and it worked a little bit? Any examples of those?
Yeah, in fact, I So one of them, there's a really great marketer, this guy named Saul Colt, and if you haven't found his stuff, you got to find his stuff. He's really awesome.
Look him up.
So we're a Techstars company, and we went to the Techstars FounderCon, which is a conference for the Techstars company founders in Boston back in November. And Saul Colt was one of the keynote speakers. He gave a talk about word of mouth marketing, which is another way of saying like guerrilla marketing, I think, in a lot of ways. And one of the things he said in his talk was try 100 things. Is like focus on like little things, like that way you're encouraging failure. You're not putting everything behind a single tactic, and it's forcing you to come up with quantity instead of quality ideas. So try 100 things, and that really inspired us. So one of my team members and me, Michelle, we wrote lots and lots of ideas down and came up with all this stuff that we are still implementing random ones whenever we get the time. And one of the things that we did was so I wrote this tweet on our account. We were kind of playing around. We've been playing around with Twitter marketing, like purchased Twitter marketing, because it's a new ad channel, and I found that new ad channels usually are undervalued. So that's a tip. Like, go buy Twitter ads if you're going to buy any ads, because it's super undervalued right now. And what we did was we wrote this tweet that says like, don't click this tweet, because if you do, we'll get charged. Instead, just type this into your browser, keen.io, which is like just a total joke. It's like something that we knew people might see, and rather than click it, they might type in the URL and not charge. Twitter won't charge us if they don't click it. But so the tactic worked, I guess. Well, it's hard. You can't attribute it.
It's hard to measure because they typed it in.
Tell them to type in the URL. But the interesting thing is that tweet got retweeted a lot, like 100+ times, and that drove a lot of traffic that we could attribute. And that's all free. So that happened. Then I wrote a post, which is like just a blog post that it ended up on the front page of Hacker News for like 6 hours. And the blog post was the story I'm telling you right now, seeing Saul Colt at that conference and then being inspired by him. And then one of the things we tried was writing this tweet. So we spent like $100. I don't remember the numbers. We spent like $100 on promoting this tweet and got just crazy traffic. Like, I wish there are numbers in the post. I don't really know, but so that worked super well. It's a little bit subversive. It's kind of like a lot of times people would respond and be like, this seems a lot like spam or whatever, and then they'd reply a little later and they'd be like, but touche, I checked out your site and I think I'm going to be a customer.
Yeah.
So that was definitely a little guerrilla. A little like we sponsored the Techstars party. We were one of the cheap sponsors. Techstars has some big companies that spend a lot more and have a lot more funding and stuff. We were one of the lowest tier sponsors. What we did was we showed up like an hour and a half early for this is at South by Southwest 2 weeks ago. We showed up at like an hour plus early for the party, just so we could stake a claim on this really awesome booth. Like we got like a coffee table and a few couches, and we just like stacked up our like multicolored flashing light cups. The red green blue is kind of our color theme, so we stacked up a pyramid of these cups, maybe like 100 of these like pint glasses. And everybody felt like we were like the anchor sponsor because we got so much attention, and everybody that was walking in had to walk past us and see this multicolored pyramid, So that's like physical guerrilla. But really, it's about trying as many things as you can. And honestly, even if you have a big marketing budget, it's healthy to pretend you don't. Or just slash it for 6 months and see what happens. Because like I feel like without the necessity to be highly leveraged, people won't. It's not about being like smart or clever. It's about necessity. Like necessity is the mother of invention.
So I was getting ready to quote the same thing.
you can constrain your kind of your ability to spend money, then you'll figure out ways to get a lot more leverage.
Yeah.
And we have a bunch of more online tactics that we could dig into.
Yeah, tell us more if you have some ready. I mean, this is good. Just it helps us brainstorm and get ideas as well.
Yeah, I mean, one of them we just discontinued because somebody wrote us an email that said it was a little shady, and we were like, actually, maybe it's a little shady, so we stopped.
Well, now I'm really interested in what it is.
Yeah, see? Storytelling. It's all about tension and release, right? So I'll just stop.
No, you can't. You can't.
No, so there's a site. I'll type it in. Really great site. I'm sure, for what you guys do, it's good to know about. Called FollowGen. FollowGen.com. Run by this awesome dude Miles. And what FollowGen does is lets you set up campaigns, and basically set up search campaigns for tweets, and it will, on behalf of your account, it will favorite tweets that match those searches. So we did this for a couple months. We got really good growth out of it. Like we were paying. I mean, the prices have gone up now, but we were paying like $20 a month, and we were getting more than 20 followers a day. So we were talking like 1% or less of what it would cost to buy Twitter ads to get that kind of exposure, and it's all super relevant stuff because we were favoriting things like somebody mentions Google Analytics and their negative sentiment, or whatever, like just stuff like that.
That's perfect.
We got a lot of growth out of that for super, super cheap. Highly recommend it. But then somebody wrote in and they were like, "Oh, it seems a little spammy. Like, I worry about ethics of the company now." And we were like, "Oh, that's a good point. Like, that's really dangerous for our kind of long-term brand perspective."
Uh-huh.
So we discontinued using it, but I highly recommend using it when you're getting going. And I wrote
to me, that's not in the gray at all.
Yeah, I wrote Miles about it, and he's like, "Look, like this is natural. This is what happens. Like,
yeah,
it's really good for people getting started, trying to get a boost of growth, and like if they get to a point where their brand is big enough that they're worried about the sort of image of using a tool like that, they discontinue. So like,
yeah, it makes sense.
Which is very, very candid from the creator of this tool.
Mm-hmm.
And we were one of his first paying customers. When it's only been a few months, but the tool has grown. FollowGen's definitely grown quite a bit. Yeah, like that's a really cool hack.
Yeah.
Little things like even just engaging people on Twitter that have reach. Just this is Maven first marketing. Like people who have reach in your segment. If you I mean, it could be looked at like you're using those people's reach, but on the other hand, I think it's authentic if you really believe that they and their audience need to know about what you do.
Yeah.
In which case, you're trying to get a megaphone that and the megaphone needs you.
Mm-hmm.
So engaging people that know this stuff, whatever your target market is. So like if you're like a wedding photographer, if you're not engaging the knot.com, which is kind of a network and publication for weddings, like. You're doing a disservice to your customers, and you're not hustling enough, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So, engaging those people on Twitter can be really valuable. Like one of the real secrets, one of the secrets. I don't know why it's a secret of the internet right now is that, Facebook is like a reunion, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you already know all the people when they add you on Facebook, right? Like you're going back to a reunion. Twitter is a cocktail party, and Twitter is a cocktail party 24 hours a day. You reach out to people on Twitter. If you send me a random email, I feel somewhat violated.
Yeah.
Like if you send me a random LinkedIn connect, I feel like stalked.
Mm-hmm.
Facebook connect, I feel really stalked. But if you send me a random tweet, I feel flattered. It's like somebody came up to me at a cocktail party.
Well, that's how me and you connected, I believe.
It is how we connected.
Yeah.
And like that's one of the real secrets to growth is that like Twitter has really democratized access, and that's something that we should all be using. It doesn't really. It doesn't really matter where you live anymore that much. It's really about, knowing who to talk to and having an authentic message, having something that they might be interested in to talk about.
Yeah.
And like you can just reach out. Like I've reached out to people who are literal or very close to literal billionaires and had gotten coffee.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't afraid to be like, hey, I see you're in town. Like let's grab coffee.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to get your opinion on such and such. And then like I'm not saying that'll always work, and I'm sure they get flooded, but like it can work.
Absolutely.
And that's unleveraged. That's like direct hustle. Like it's not leveraged unless you consider that they might be a maven and they might know the customer or the investor that's going to get your company over the hump.
Yeah.
And if you can recruit allies who have a lot of access, then you've done your whole job in a lot of ways. Like, even if what you did was recruit allies who have a lot of access, now you're Switzerland. You're safe. Like, so that's, just using Twitter in general, just basics. There's no real tactic. Message somebody with something interesting and try to meet up.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. As you've watched kind of the growth of Keen.io, has anything surprised you about it? Because I'm sure you came in with some preconceived notions, like this is how we'll grow, this is who's going to be talking about us, this is the way the chart's going to look. Has anything been surprising about watching Keen.io grow?
A lot of things have been surprising, and some things, even though we have preconceived notions, like we're very strategic people, and we talk a lot about strategy and a lot of theory about what should work. We all play board games and like hardcore board games and stuff, right? And we had plans that, even when those plans worked the way we thought they would, it was super surprising. Like it's been super surprising that our blog first strategy kind of works. Like
that's awesome.
I was in India like a month ago, and I sat down for dinner or for lunch with like a table. There were like 5 people, I think 6 including me. And somebody mentioned something about how a friend had told him to follow me on Twitter because I tweet about like culture and recruiting a lot, and like work culture. And then somebody else said something about how he found us originally because of a blog post that we wrote like a week earlier about iPhone session tracking. So some deep data stuff, like how to track people's sessions in an iPhone, had a model of session in an iPhone app visit. And then somebody else was like, yeah, I like how your blog doesn't only cover that stuff. Like your logo looks really great, and the blog, your designer, I think, posted something about how he designed your logo. And I was like, I'm in Mumbai right now. These are just random entrepreneurs in India who know who we are. That's awesome. Like we didn't even exist like 14 months ago, and nobody knew who we are a year ago. So just the fact that it's working alone is super surprising, even though it shouldn't be surprising. Like that was the plan. It's just like you got to pinch yourself when it's working, and especially whenever it took faith to keep going with it when you didn't know if it's working. It's like, oh, that blog post got 40,000 uniques, but like where are the signups? That kind of short-term, outcome-oriented thinking is valuable. Sometimes it's totally right, but sometimes faith in your strategy can really help. Like surprises, things that didn't work the way we expected. I think that geography has really melted away in a lot of ways. Like our approach is, since it's not verticalized and it's not geographic, we're very towards like thin horizontal, like developers in companies with between 3 and 20 developers. That's very horizontal. It's been surprising how geographically distributed. So like that Mumbai incident's just one of so many. Like on my recent trips to the Middle East and India to like do tech ambassadorship, like I just met people that know us. People in cities around the U.S., you're more likely to know us, for instance, I think, I don't have the data for this, despite being a data person, but it feels like you're more likely to know us if you live, like we're a San Francisco-based company, but it seems like people in like Austin, downtown Austin, are more likely to know about us than people in the valley 30 miles south of here, like in Palo Alto, which is it's interesting, like the hipster first kind of sector thing. It's really playing out. Like if I wear our Kenai hoodie, or like I've got our t-shirt on now.
Nice. I like that.
But if I wear that thing around in like, in, we'll say like one of the tech strips in Brooklyn, I'm so much more likely to have somebody stop me than I am if I'm in Mountain View. So it's been surprising that we haven't spread like a virus from San Francisco out. We've spread all over the place, which is, and more in cities. And we're obviously, as we go up market, we'll probably move, from downtown Chicago to the huge companies in Chicagoland and the suburbs, or like from San Francisco's like skinny jeans and Series A companies down to like the valley with like big companies like Cisco and Citrix and stuff. That's how we go up market, is we radiate out from cities. But it's been interesting to see that, the growth, when you do internet marketing, geography just really melts away. Like the cultural ties are tighter between two city hubs than they are between the city and its own suburb. Yeah. Pretty crazy.
No, that's great insight. A couple last questions here. Are there any strategies for growth that you haven't yet tried, but that you're considering? That like, oh, we want to throw a bunch of money at pay-per-click, or we want to try this other thing. What's kind of on the horizon that you think you'll eventually test out a little bit?
Oh man, I mean,
everything, right?
so many. Some of them are back pocket. We're super transparent, usually after the fact.
No, that's fine. Well, tell us what you can tell us.
But so a few things, like we're really digging into education as a form of marketing. Education feels good. You learn a lot more by teaching than you do by sitting in a class anyway. So, we're doing it in a sort of unscalable way now, teaching small classes, teaching groups like, we teach at like Hack Reactor, which is a dev boot camp. We're involved with Girl Develop It, teaching classes like analytics for hackers at Girl Develop It. We've taught analytics for hackers at G School in Denver, which is one of our investors, Galvanize, runs this awesome co-working space and school that we're digging in more over the next few months to build. In fact, we have a call in like 3 hours to talk about the class material to build a more long-form kind of thing, because this developer bootcamp movement is really important. Really can help. We think a lot of people think can help with the unemployment crisis that we have. People are dropping out of their undergrad, going to 3 months of dev boot camp and getting a good job. After 3 months, that's awesome, as opposed to having 4 years of student loan debt. But we think that data science can really help those people find work. So we're doing that in an unscalable way now. So it's not exactly growth hacking. It's more like we're revving up the engine and kind of designing it and trying to figure out what's the material that works. But we're going to be launching an online education thing, kind of like Code Academy, but for data science and analytics.
Oh, that's cool. Well, you got to come back on when you launch that, and so you can tell us all about it.
Yeah, love to, love to. I mean, we really think like, and the reason that we think that that'll help us with our growth is that the more people know about this stuff, the more comfortable they are with it, the more concepts that they know, the better taste they'll have in products, and they'll probably end up choosing us.
Yeah.
Which is a very long-term approach.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, we'll see how that works. Like. Education as marketing. I mean, it seems like it worked with growing the Ruby community. No, it wasn't a business growing it. You know, it's like the education from things like Try Ruby, Hackety Hack, you know, Wise Pointing Guide to Ruby. These are things that happened, you know, between 5 and 7 years ago that really kickstarted the Ruby community because they made a bunch of people who are not developers feel like developers all of a sudden. And now, you know, rather than investing in changing people's attitudes and tool choice, you're just creating a generation of people who have a certain kind of taste around tools.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's a hack that it's going to be ongoing, and I don't know, I feel pretty confident about it. That's a big 2013 for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think you know, education as marketing is kind of an extension of what you've already learned from your blog. I mean, people don't go to your blog because they're not learning something. They go because they're learning something. They're seeing the world in a new way. They're understanding something they didn't understand. So I think it's going to be almost an extension of what you've already kind of proven works, you know, in some sense. This has been a great interview. I have one last question for you. What's the best advice that you have for anyone that's trying to grow a startup right now? Because you provide the tools to help people grow, and you yourself are in a startup trying to grow. So what's the best advice you have for somebody trying to grow a startup?
Best advice. Best advice. I mean, never stop studying, never stop trying stuff, you know? Like, you know, I mean, I spent the weekend reading a couple books, Anti-Fragile and To Sell Is Human, because I don't feel like I know enough, you know? Never, like, seriously, there's no such thing as being too good at growth. So even if things look good, don't get complacent. Like, always push the curve up, more up to the right. Like, I think that's pretty key. And I think don't delegate marketing. Don't delegate growth.
Okay.
You know, like if you're a CEO, I'm a CEO. My job is growth. I mean, everybody on the team's job is growth to some extent, but a lot of companies will be like, oh yeah, you know, I'm focused on this thing, and we've got a growth person over here, we've got our blogger, we've got our marketer. You know, that kind of, when you're small and you compartmentalize people like that and compartmentalize functions like that, you give up the biggest advantage we have, which is that, like, I have like a dev department and a marketing department and a you know, PR department all in my head, and I don't have to have meetings. Like, I you know, I just like, oh, I need a tool I need a bot that's gonna do this. I'll just make the bot. Like, you know, that's the key advantage we have, is how fast we are, and we're fast because we're interdisciplinary. So we can't give that up. As startups, that's our key advantage. We have to use it. So I would say, I guess that's the real advice. Don't compartmentalize and delegate this stuff. This stuff's too important. It needs to be all across your company.
Absolutely. That's awesome advice to end on. Kyle, thank you so much for coming on the program. You're a wealth of information.
Thanks for having me.